From the university where they both graduated, to the centre of the city where two lives were taken years before their time. Family, friends, politicians gathered to remember Jack Merritt and Saskia Jones in silence. "25-year-old Jack smiling with his girlfriend Leanne O'Brien. Today she stepped through Cambridge. Her world changed forever. The arm reaching out to comfort her, that of Jack's dad, David Merritt. Saskia Jones was 23. She wanted to join the police and focus on victim support, having graduated from University of Cambridge's Institute of Criminology.
She was really brilliant. She was funny. She was cheeky. She'd always have something to say. In the classroom, she was usually the first one to have something to say. If you know, I don't know, at university when you ask a question, there's often a wall of silence. She was never silent. She always had something to say. She was right there. She focused on everything. She never missed a beat. She wanted people to be nice to each other. That was where she came from. She was everybody's friend.
What brought Jack and Saskia to London on Friday was a conference on prisoner rehabilitation. Today, details of what happened inside the venue, Fishmongers Hall, became clearer. The acts of heroism more visceral, as the man who runs the venue explained how a kitchen porter doing the washing up ran towards the screaming.
Lucas rips off the wall this sort of long stick and charges in towards the terrorist. He gets him here right in the chest, but it bounces sort of off. He's clearly got some sort of protective vest, which we now know was a lookalike suicide vest underneath. But he's buying time. He's allowing others to crawl out the way and find a bit of space and so on. And he's got a long minute one-on-one knife fight, and it's pretty brutal. The terrorist comes up his arm and eventually gets it around about 5 different slashes and stab wounds up here. And he's eventually joined by 2 others. One's got a fire extinguisher, another's got a narwhal tusk and an ornament just on the wall there. And one way or the other, this guy called Khan is outnumbered.
The man they were fighting, shot dead just seconds after this footage, was Usman Khan, jailed in 2012 for his part in an Al-Qaeda-inspired plot to bomb high-profile locations and build a terrorist training camp in Pakistan. Released in December 2018. But while Khan may have been beyond redemption, rehabilitation of prisoners was what his victim Jack Merritt devoted his life to. Sophie worked with Jack at a Category A prison just a few months ago.
He was wonderful. I mean, the atmosphere that he cultivated inside the classrooms was so engaging, it was refreshing. People wanted to be there, and I think that's quite a crucial reflection on the kind of space that was being created inside the prison. He fiercely championed education as an opportunity for offender rehabilitation. That would be the one thing, if I could sum up, that he definitely wanted to drive the reform of offender education.
Learning Together is frankly the best thing that I've done.
A Learning Together fundraiser video, the prison education programme Jack was a coordinator for. This was his message.
Through discomfort comes growth, so hopefully through major discomfort will come major growth.
And today, Jack's father delivered his message to politicians and some sections of the press in an article for The Guardian. He wrote, Jack would be livid his death has been used to further an agenda of hate. Today, David Merritt's words were put to the Prime Minister.
Well, of course, I feel as everybody does, a huge amount of sympathy for the loss of Jack Merritt's family and indeed for all the relatives of Jack and Saskia who perished at London Bridge. But be in no doubt, I've campaigned against early release and against short sentences for many years. It was in my manifesto in 2012 when I was Mayor of London. I said it in August, and it's in the Queen's Speech. In fact, there's a bill we've got ready to go in the Queen's Speech to stop automatic early release for serious and violent offenders.
Politicised or not, there are many questions to answer as to how this tragedy could come about. But today was not for politics. Today was for remembering two lives ended far, far too short.
Well, MI5 and Scotland Yard are now carrying out an urgent inquiry into how a convicted terrorist who was under active investigation was able to carry out a deadly attack. It's also emerged that another of the extremists who was jailed alongside Usman Khan in 2012 has been arrested in Stoke-on-Trent. Our Home Affairs correspondent Darshna Soni is there. Darshna.
This is where Usman Khan grew up, and his family and friends still live here. Today, Kathy, I've been speaking to some of his associates, and they tell me that before he left for that conference on Friday, Usman Khan rang his mum to tell her that he was going to London, and he said he would be back later that evening. And when his family apparently asked whether he was allowed to travel that far, because remember, under his licence conditions, he had to stay within this geographical area, he apparently told them that he'd been given permission to travel by probation and the police. Of course, he never did come home. He went on to carry out that attack on London Bridge. And today we obtained a new picture of him with Anjem Choudary, the radical preacher. And I've been told that he came under Chowdhury's influence after he had left school without any qualifications, and Khan and Choudhury were often seen together in Stoke city centre running a dawah stall, spreading the word of Islam.
And what can you tell us about that arrest of one of his associates in Stoke?
Well, it came after the Conservatives had briefed a number of newspapers that they were going to carry out a crackdown or blitz on the 70 or so ex-terrorism convicts who had now been released on licence. And one of those was 34-year-old Nizam Hussain. Mr Hussain is one of the group of 9 who was arrested back in 2010, along with Usman Khan, for their plot to blow up the London Stock Exchange. Now, like Usman Khan, Hussain had been released early from prison after originally been given an indeterminate sentence. He had also appealed that and had also been released. And today detectives were searching his house. He lives not far from here. And this evening, after that search, he has been recalled to prison.
And Usman Khan also had links with another prisoner who was also released early and went on to commit another terrorist offence.
Yes, interestingly, in that original plot, there were 4 men from Stoke. One of them, Mahabir Rahman, he'd also been convicted, but was also released early from prison after his legal team argued that he had been carrying out de-radicalisation in prison and that he had reformed. He was released early, but then was convicted of another plot involving a group from Birmingham. It was described as a plot to carry out a Lee Rigby-style attack on the streets of Birmingham. Now, given all these cases in Stoke, despite the rhetoric that we've heard about tougher sentences, people who work in counter-terrorism and de-radicalisation here in Stoke have said to me that what these cases show is that we don't need tougher justice. What we need is smarter justice.
Darshna, thanks very much. John.
I've been speaking with the former head of the parole board for England and Wales, Nick Hardwick, who resigned from the post last year, and I began by asking him about the wider backdrop of reforms to the criminal justice system, including prisons.
Well, the backdrop is that the prison system has been facing an enduring crisis, as the Cross-Party Justice Committee said only a month ago. And that's principally because of the loss of experienced staff. So the government is now trying to recruit new staff, but they can't replace the experience that's been lost. And it's that experience that's critical to managing the most dangerous prisoners.
Are they attempting to get these experienced probation officers, these experienced prison officers back?
In time, of course, the new staff will gain experience and they'll get better at the job, but it will take time. What's also needed, I think, is for staff to have the time they need to do the job. There need to be enough of them. So this isn't often with these sorts of prisoners a matter of rushing from one thing to another. It's having the time to listen about what's going on, to spend time on the wing, so you have a sense that maybe something's a bit different today.
Now, at some point, parole comes in, the parole board that you were chair of. Is that too in any kind of flux, or is that a stable element of this situation?
The parole board wasn't consulted in this case. But let's be clear, the decisions on terrorist cases are taken by the parole board's most experienced judicial members who've got experience of dealing in the courts with these sorts of offenders. But there is no perfect way that you can know what someone's future behaviour is going to be like. And certainly from what the media reports that have come out suggest that the perpetrator in this case was not giving obvious signs while he was in prison of his risk.
Given the scale of what you describe in terms of the disruption to prison staffing, how long will it take to get a system that is capable of evaluating dangerous prisoners?
It's going to take a long time to put this right. People have been, and I myself and others have been warning about the dangers in the prison system for a long time. It's neglected. I think it's been a case of out of sight, out of mind. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. And this is not, as I say, just a matter for the prison service, but it's also been there's also been a similar situation in the probation service.
Well, of course, the politicians are all talking about this and saying what they will do and what they won't do. But the point surely needs to be what is actually needed to ensure that a problem and a crisis like this does not emerge again.
I think this is a time for cool reflection and intelligent policy making so we get the right answers to this, not a kind of knee-jerk response that maybe gets a few votes in the short term but doesn't fix the problem in the long term.
Nick Hardwick, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, the Conservative Bob Neill is the outgoing chair of the Commons Justice Committee. And earlier I asked him if the Prime Minister should take some responsibility after the London Bridge attack for failing in that instance to keep the public safe.
I think we need to recognise that we're dealing with a particularly difficult group of people in relation to those convicted of terrorist offences. And I don't think this is a problem that's arisen recently. It's an issue that's been an issue for governments of all political corrections. He's right to set out the timeline as to the legislative changes, which in fact the current government brought in, and the proposals going forward. But I think the most important thing is to recognise that public protection does have to be at the centre of sentencing policy, and we've all got to find the best possible means of achieving that.
When you see a headline in the Times this morning that the Prime Minister is vowing to lock terrorists up and throw away the key, that was inspired by a new, tougher approach from the Prime Minister. Is that the right approach or not?
I think with terrorism, it may be necessary that we draw a distinction from other types of offence. And perhaps I can just pay tribute to the work of those two desperately brave young people whose lives sadly were lost in the Learning Together programme. Because broadly, we are right to try and find means of rehabilitating those who do not present a threat to society. The difficulty with terrorism is that very often the people there are motivated by very deep-seated underlying ideologies which may have festered for many years and can sometimes be quite well concealed for a period of time. It is much more complex than the normal run of cases, so it is, I think, perhaps legitimate to look at a different sentencing regime for this particular type of highly dangerous but very small group of people.
But should the government, your Conservative Party, accept responsibility for some of the shortcomings in rehabilitating particularly this group of prisoners, terrorists, convicted terrorists? When you look at what the former counter-terrorism official Ian Acheson said, he advised ministers on Islamist extremism in jails, and he said that there were serious deficiencies in almost every aspect of the management of terrorist offenders through the system. Do you accept some blame for that?
I think every one of us has to accept some measure of blame. The country as a whole, actually, has to accept that we have not taken this issue seriously enough. politicians, regardless of party, members of the public, the media. None of us, I think, have given enough attention to the criminal justice system as a whole, but also to the particular difficulties of this cohort of terrorists. I don't think the tone of blaming people on any side by any of us actually helps.
When you say the country has to take some responsibility, it's the Conservatives who've been running the country since 2010, and as a result there's been a drop-off in attempts to rehabilitate prisoners. Was that a mistake to cut funding in prisons?
I think funding is only a part of the issue. It's also the use to which you put that funding.
Was the Prime Minister right to try and put the blame onto Labour, given what Jack Merritt's dad has written very movingly? He said that Jack would be livid his death has been used to further an agenda of hate and political buck-passing.
I don't believe the Prime Minister 1 second is seeking to further an agenda of hate. I take on board very seriously what Jack Merritt's parents say. As I say, I'm aware of the work of that organisation that Jack and Saskia were involved with. I met some of their people themselves. They do most admirable work, and they were very admirable young people.
Bob Neal speaking to me earlier. Well, Baroness Chakrabarti is Labour's Shadow Attorney General, and she joins me now. Should terrorists serve a full jail term, in your view?
That's a very big question, and then someone can make this clickbait and say Chakrabarti says terrorists should walk free. I mean, this is how despicable the debate has been in recent days with these young people barely cold. Terrorist offences are a wide range of offences. Life sentences are available for the most serious cases. Life sentences were available in relation to Mr. Khan. The courts need to make a judgment about what they believe is the right sentence on the fact.
So in some instances it's OK for terrorists not to serve their full term?
Well, here's the issue. If somebody's not given a life sentence, then at some point they will leave prison. And sometimes there is value in letting people out a bit before the end of the sentence so that you can keep tabs on them on licence before they are finally absolutely free. So there is a... And
but
also
not
there
halfway.
I think that some of the issues around sentencing in recent years, and it's become very complicated, very technical, there's been lots and lots of reform, have been around this kind of war of words that leads to overstuffed prisons. And when you have overstuffed prisons, because of all the rhetoric and the arms race between both parties, let's be honest, then suddenly there's a corrective, which is, oh, we can have our long sentences if we can just let people out automatically early, and that's potentially problematic.
Would a Labour government toughen sentencing, as Boris Johnson is proposing?
What, throw away the key?
He didn't say that, but you know, that's how his words have been interpreted.
It's been spun, hasn't it? I mean...
but would you toughen sentencing at all?
I think that what we want is smarter, as somebody said in one of your reports, you want smarter justice. So you want to be able to imprison dangerous people, including terrorists, for a proportionate amount of time, and only let them out when there's been a proper assessment rather than automatically. But you don't want prisons that are so full with more minor offenders and people suffering from substance abuse and mental health problems that you can't actually engage with the more serious prisoners.
Would a Labour government reverse every penny of those cuts to the prison budget since 2010?
We're going to have to do our best to reverse as much as we can. It's very difficult to get a grip on just how bad things are, because new matters arise all the time, not just in relation to prison, but also in relation to prosecutors, in relation to police, and so on.
But you want 7,000 new prison officers.
Yeah.
What would that cost?
Well,